One of the more interesting controversies between the original trilogy and later the sequel trilogy, and even in the prequels, of course, is the so-called Skywalker bloodline and how Rey got her powers. Now, I myself am not a big fan of Rise of Skywalker or how they try to explain these complications, but if we want to be very honest, this really all comes back to the prequels and the way that the Midichlorians were introduced, and very radically, to try to explain more about the Jedi's powers and how the Force works. And I'm going to here try to do both pro and con. I don't like the Midichlorians, I'm not a big fan of them, and really they've done more harm than good. But some people have speculated that actually, if you really look at it, the original trilogy already laid the idea for the Midichlorians, so they weren't really that radical. I don't think this is true, but we'll go through the argument. So, in the original trilogy, in Return of the Jedi, Luke tells us that the Force is strong in his family, and he's talking to Leia, and he says, my father has it, I have it, and my sister has it. So that implies that the biology of the Force and those who wield it are very close together. Now, Gary Kurtz is the one who really pushed the idea that the Force is more of a spiritual kind of energy. It doesn't really have a scientific basis. But it is a fact that Lucas wanted the Midichlorians in the original trilogy. He actually planned to have them, but ultimately decided not to. Now, whether this is because of Gary or it just didn't fit in the script, we don't know. But he went through several different ideas. So the Midichlorians were always in his mind, even in the late 70s. He just didn't implement them in the original trilogy. And it is true the dialogue seems to hint at the kind of biological explanation for the Force. But as far as I know, there's no cut scene or no version of the script, at least not one I can get my hands on, where the Midichlorians do explicitly come out. So the Midichlorians do debut in Episode 1, where Qui-Gon talks to Anakin, who's curious, like, well, what are the Midichlorians? And Qui-Gon gives his famous little monologue in terms of how the Midichlorians work and how they can be counted and why the Jedi use it and so on and so forth. But I'm not seeing any real evidence that it was really laid out in the original trilogy. Obviously, George had these ideas, but he didn't yet implement it. Now, why they're not even done in these special editions, the best I could come up with is this. Since he assumed people were going to see the prequels anyway, that you're going to see parts 1, 2, 3, and the Midichlorians are already there, so you just implicitly have it in the back of your mind. So when you watch the original trilogy, presumably everybody knows that, this is how the Midichlorians work. And also, the Jedi have been more or less eliminated as a political force. There are still some Jedi, but, the Midichlorians only really mattered because the Jedi used it as a way to find Force-sensitive users and then basically track them and have them in the order. And in a sly way, obviously Lucas is kind of implying that the Jedi are basically monopolizing the Midichlorians. So the hypothesis that the Midichlorians were somehow in the original trilogy I don't think holds up. But I do think they have a point that Lucas implicitly always wanted this idea. Now, for myself, I still don't think it works. I think it just really makes the universe way too small. It makes everybody basically sort of linked to the Skywalker family and turns this really big, mysterious universe into a very small, compact family. And really, the Palpatines are the only other family that matters. So, for me, reducing it all to blood did more harm than good. But I would agree, even though there's no real explicit evidence of the Midichlorians in the original trilogy, that there are hints that Lucas was going to move it in a much more biological, scientific manner. So if you were shocked by what he did in the prequels, well, you shouldn't be, because there were already a lot of hints he was going to go down that route, and the expanded universe does sort of give us more about the Midichlorians even before Episode 1 was released. So there we have it, the good and bad and ugly about the Midichlorians in the Star Wars universe. Star Wars Analyzed. If you like the content, please hit the like button and or subscribe. Please comment below. Please share the content if you can. Thanks for listening. Please be safe.